Coming to you from a White House super spreader event, I'm RJ Balde, and this is the Trichome's Hashitout podcast. On this show, we feature conversations about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. In this episode, I'll be talking to Dr. Michele Ross about how expecting the unexpected comes in handy in the cannabis industry. We'll also talk about her experience with cannabis and fibromyalgia, advocating for education in women's health and cannabis, and much more. Without further ado, it's time to hash it out. Today, I am joined by Dr. Michele Ross, PhD. Michele is a neuroscientist, author, public speaker, and professional in the benefits of cannabis, mushroom, and plant medicines with specialties in fibromyalgia, mental health, and women's health. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I'm stoked to have you here. Now, where are you joining us virtually from in the sound waves here?
Sure. Well, since the pandemic happened, I actually moved from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, but I am loving it here.
You're loving it there? Okay, cool. Yeah, I was literally just in Vegas this past weekend for my niece's fifth birthday. So we were in the same neck of the woods.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, right on. How long did you live in LA before you moved to Vegas?
Goodness. About 10 years with like a little brief space in between in Denver. It's funny. I've been all over the United States. I'm sort of a little bit of a gypsy.
Cool. I dig that. That's awesome. I definitely appreciate a change of scene, so I envy that lifestyle. What brought you out to Vegas?
It's just a lot easier to do the kind of work that you need to do. Los Angeles is very, I would say, it's expensive to live, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to start up a new business. I've been doing work both in cannabis as well as other natural plant medicines like mushrooms and kratom. So just a little
Mhm.
bit easier to just expand and do all the many goals that I love to do.
I see. I see. And then how did you say when you moved out to Vegas? How long you've been there?
It's probably been about like 8 months now.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, my family, we're all originally from Michigan.
Okay.
And I was the first to sort of leave the nest. And I was like, I'm going to go as far away as possible in the same country. So I went to the opposite side of the country. And then they kind of followed me and almost made it as far as me, but they settled for Vegas. Not settled for Vegas. Vegas is beautiful. I love it there. So,
Well, it's
um,
really interesting too because before the pandemic hit, it really was a tourist
mhm,
destination. I think they get like, I don't know, 40 million people coming through from all different countries in the world. It's a big center for conventions like the big MJ Biz convention and all that. And
mhm.
so, when you're doing something where you're working with patients that, might fly in from other countries to meet you and things like that, it's actually makes it a really nice hub. Like the airport's really easy to get to. Like it just
Yeah.
really nice because I do so much work here in the United States, but people don't realize I talk to patients in Australia, in the UK, like all over. And some of them are like, let's do the work here. So it's nice to be able to meet people in person and also, be able to catch up on some of the conventions that are even outside of cannabis. I do a lot of health work in meeting clinicians, that are doing pain management or working in women's health. And there's just so much education that I always need to catch up on. So it's nice that it really comes home to me now.
That is true. Yeah. Yeah. Vegas is very much um a hub of things, like very many, like a
Mhm.
wide array of communities sort of merge there. And like you said, the airport is so accessible in the town. So yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that you are taking those opportunities to stay busy during this pandemic time. Now, as we'll find out throughout our conversation, expect the unexpected has sort
Mhm.
of been a personal mantra throughout your life, and it reflects in your experience. Funnily enough, I also kind of think that's the theme for 2020, wouldn't you?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's funny. That line actually comes from Big Brother, a reality TV show I was on
Yeah, yeah.
11 years ago. But yeah, my whole life, if you had talked to me, when I was 5 years old and I wanted to be a doctor, I would have never guessed that my career trajectory would have gone from neuroscientist studying addiction to, a leader in the cannabis industry to being on television
Yeah.
as a first scientist in reality TV. It's been crazy. And then, you know what? I think the ups and downs have prepared me so well, really, to be prepared for anything. And a lot of people have been struggling during 2020, but in fact,
Mm,
I believe cannabis has been thriving, and I've been thriving with it. So it's been a little bit of a strange time. I feel like
yeah.
I have been able to, thrive during this time. And that's really helped me with my patients. A lot of patients are coming to me, looking to, reduce their drinking or reduce their dependence on antidepressants or anti-anxiety pills, and really shift to
Mhm.
cannabis and other natural methods. And it's really just been a great space to really start that shift in healing and start transforming people, and moving them to, a life of just surviving to a life of thriving and being, present, which a lot of
Yeah.
times when you're on all these medications isn't really possible.
Certainly. And it's been interesting to watch, with as dark of a cloud as, the pandemic and the events of this year have been. Um, it's enlightening in a way to sort of see how such an unprecedented and extraordinary circumstance has sort of facilitated um, very needed changes, whether it be with the inner workings of certain businesses and how they operate, or whether that be with the perception of alternative medicines like cannabis or like mushrooms or these natural remedies. Uh, you know, a lot of the times those ships of public opinion can be really hard to turn. But because the pandemic has sort of slowed very many things down, but at the same time it's sped up a lot of necessary adaptations and necessary improvements, I think, in for public perception, if we're talking specifically for cannabis.
Mhm. And, it's been an interesting year too outside of cannabis, right? We've had this shift of all these different companies popping up in the psychedelic space, with
Mm,
ketamine and psilocybin. There's been a lot of legalization wins in terms of decriminalizing plant
right.
medicines. And it's nice because when, we start these conversations of, well, you can take these, uh, you know, plant medicines to help soothe your anxiety or depression, or maybe quit smoking. There's even talks now of using these plants as anti-inflammatories. It's interesting because there's people that didn't really even understand that you could use cannabis for those purposes, and they heard
Hmm.
about magic mushrooms first and then went down to, well, what's legal in my state? Oh, cannabis. Okay,
Right.
well, cannabis sounds a lot safer than magic mushrooms, so let's
Right.
start there. And these are really the conversations I've been having with patients now, where I have to thank magic mushrooms for them, trying CBD now finally,
Yeah.
So it's just these are times where people are looking to do something different to manage stress, and other issues that they've never had to deal with before. I mean, the average
Mhm.
mom, is juggling, I don't know, all their kids homeschooling, trying to like jump on Zooms with their teachers while also dealing with like maybe a loss of income in their home and things like that.
Mm.
There's just so many things that they have to handle. And, I think that really 2020 has made people come, to be able to face whatever trauma or whatever issues that they were trying to ignore, and they could sort of, band-aid together the solutions. And really
Hmm.
now it's a nice time to really say, okay, I have to confront my anxiety. I have to confront, what's causing these things, in order to grow and be the person that I need to be. And so it's been just a really rewarding time to help people, find themselves and get through this.
Definitely. And it's essential work now more than ever, that's for sure. And I like that you put the emphasis on not masking your anxieties or your pain or whatever you may be feeling, but to fully confront it, which I think is one of the main differences in natural substances like cannabis or like psilocybin or mushrooms, is that it approaches what you're dealing with from a different angle, as opposed to opioids or other pharmaceuticals like that sort of mask the pain. um, similar to like if something smelled bad in your house and you just sprayed something and it just covers up the smell but doesn't get rid of where the odors are coming from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because cannabis can be used in the same way to numb the pain as opposed to deal with it and grow through it. And
Mm,
I still do have patients go, well, I feel like I'm smoking too much marijuana, or like, how do I
mm,
use it in a more mindful way? And
mhm,
really being able to talk about, using cannabis and maybe doing yoga or using cannabis and doing some type of therapy, like things where you
mhm.
compare it with that personal growth rather than, I'm gonna just take as many edibles I can and wake up and it's
Right,
2021, it's all over. Like, some of
right,
us think that like wish we could do that, but like that's not the most healthy way to deal with it. And it's
right.
just been nice to actually also introduce a lot of the THC and CBD combination products to patients as well, because I do feel like those are ways that we can really deal with stress without having to worry too much about like being high during the day. I know a lot of people are like at home now. It's so funny because it's so much easier to smoke weed and do your job because no one knows, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
there's also people that are like that. It's almost like too much of a temptation, and so trying to help people, I'm like, you can smoke weed before your job. Just use ratio products because
Sure.
CBD is good for anxiety and also relieves tension and things like that. So the conversations I've been having have been completely different this year than in past years. But I've been helping people smoke weed during work. It's
Or
funny.
yeah, 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 that's such a good point that you bring up that, you know, it's important to remember that these things are not the end all be all, you know. They're
Mhm.
tools, or they're supplements that you
Mhm.
have to incorporate along with other things in your life that facilitate your well-being. You know, they're not magic cures that you can just take and then sort of, trip out and then fall into an edible nap and then wake up and all your problems are gone. Like it's definitely something that, like you said, it's useful to incorporate along with, say, a yoga practice or an exercise practice, or even staying hydrated and eating well. Like
Mhm.
it's just part of a building block. It's one building block rather in a foundation of things that are well-being.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Cannabis is the gateway to health if you do it right.
I like that. Cannabis is the gateway to health, and then in parentheses, if you do it right. That's perfect. Yeah. Now, I understand that your involvement in the cannabis industry is sort of in contrast to your upbringing in New Jersey in the late 90s. So, can you tell me more about that upbringing and the common misconceptions you were told when you were coming up?
Goodness. Well, I was raised by a strict conservative Catholic family, and basically imprinted on that drugs are bad.
Mm.
But hilariously, I actually lived in a neighborhood in front of, and my neighbors were actually drug dealers. So
Oh,
I
no
actually
way.
got to see it. I actually got to see it firsthand. Like, yes, drugs
Wow.
are bad. Like, this is what happens. They were selling crack and cocaine and things like that, and it was
Mm.
just really, really bad. Experience to see robberies and other things that were just really harmful. From a very young age, I really did want to help people who are on drugs, and it was just a really weird moral calling for, I don't know, like a 7-year-old. But I was very much like a little like miniature doctor when I was a kid. I mean, like I was dead set on helping people, and so
Wow.
um, you know, I was in New Jersey. I was, taught drugs were bad, and I wanted to help heal people. And who knew that, again, years later, I would be healing people with the same drugs that I thought were bad, because, of course, cannabis was lumped into one of those bad drugs that people sell and people shouldn't be taking. And of course, when I went through my studies in college, I
Mhm.
actually started studying drug addiction. As I had got research fellowships and everything, I was definitely a nerd my whole life. So it was like top of class, getting all the jobs. I was chopping off rat heads and like looking at receptors in the brains and things like that.
Whoa, that sounds so
And
cool.
it was a lot of fun. Let's just say that. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I could have been working, the hamburger food cafeteria job, or I could be chopping off, heads. So I
Oh,
definitely had the weirdest job
the
probably
choice
in
is
college.
obvious there. Yeah. Yeah.
But I went through this and I ended up going into a PhD program, and I was also dead set on, okay, I'm going to do my PhD in neuroscience. I'm going to study brain addiction. I'm going to cure, uh, you know, substance abuse and no one will want to take drugs ever again in the United States or the world. Like that was like my goal. And it's funny. And so my very first paper, I'm like, okay, so I get assigned a paper from my mentor, and it was like, look at how cannabis, of course, like it was called marijuana in
Mm,
those settings because the government is funding research on marijuana is bad, and here's all how
mhm,
it hurts the brain. And we ended up putting out a paper how cannabis and cannabinoids may actually increase new brain cell growth, and that's partly because of CBD. And then, this work was done, goodness, like 15 years ago. So,
mhm.
uh, we didn't know too much about cannabis. There wasn't a lot of research about it. Everything that we did know really was that it was supposed to be an evil drug of abuse that we had to keep writing papers on to make sure that no one did these drugs.
Right,
Like,
right.
and so it was sort of interesting. Like, that's where I started off with was like, okay, cannabis micro brain cells, and you don't get any more money, to research that when that's what you write. The government's like, nope, okay, next. So I studied a lot, cocaine. I studied all these other drugs, and then it's just funny because when I came out of my PhD, I moved to California. I did my
Mhm,
postdoc at Caltech, and that's when I ended up like in reality television, which is
mhm.
like a total complete U-turn there. But I ended up returning to cannabis just because I was in California, and medical marijuana has been legal there for so long. So
Mhm.
I ended up meeting people in the industry, and really being told, hey, you have such a strength, putting together, mm, what causes things, what solves problems. Like, I've been a problem solver my whole life. My dad actually was like an electrical troubleshooter. Like, he would figure out what things were wrong to like make robots work and things like that in a car
What?
factory. So yeah, so he was like
What?
the guy where like basically the robots would fail like making cars, and like he would have like 1 second to like be able to like turn on the factory, or else he would lose like millions of dollars.
Whoa. Wow,
So
that's
like,
pressure.
yeah. So for
Holy
me, like,
cow.
I've always been like the problem solver. I've been really good scientist, really good at making hypotheses and like making them work,
Mhm,
and really, putting like two fields together and like coming up with something completely novel. And so with cannabis, it was interesting because there were so many things that we didn't know at the time, right? There wasn't a lot of like huge people studying it. We had Dr. Ethan Russo, who had the theory of cannabinoid deficiency, who I really loved his work, and that sort of like spawned my work really in trying to
mhm.
figure out what kind of conditions could cannabis help. Why would it help? Are there different genes that maybe make us more responsive to cannabis? Like, there's so many things I was so excited about. Like, basically, cannabis is all about how does it impact the brain and body. And here I was a brain scientist, and I already had some work, done in that field. And so I just started putting things together. I launched a nonprofit back in the day. I started writing my book, Vitamin Weed. I did so much like work. Like, I literally, I'm one of those dorks that works like 14 hours a day because when I get excited about something, like I'm just, I'm all in. So,
Nice.
I went all in cannabis, and it's interesting because now years later, I've been working with patients. I've done work in the lab. Like, I've done so much to really, further it, the industry. But also, I really needed to use cannabis for myself because I ended up coming down with a couple of conditions that took a long time to get a diagnosis for, including
Mhm,
fibromyalgia and nerve damage.
mhm.
And really, cannabis was the only thing that helped me. I've been on all sorts of medications from morphine, which I know as an addiction scientist, I shouldn't have been put on. Morphine is
Wow.
horribly addictive and scary to come off of. I went through
Yeah.
the whole morphine withdrawal experience that cannabis actually made a lot better than it could have been. But
Whoa.
for me, cannabis has done things that no other prescription medication has. But then over the years, it's interesting because you know there are a lot of people that respond very well to cannabis, and no matter what I do, like, I don't build a tolerance to THC. It's hilarious. Like, I will fall asleep if you give me like a 5 milligram gummy. I've been using cannabis for 15 years, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still fall asleep, and then people will laugh at me, and I'm like, I literally have to use like 1.5 milligrams during the day, like cut my little
Yeah.
like mini candy into parts. Like, so for me, like, I use CBD, THC, I use kratom sometimes, I use mushrooms, like I use
Yeah.
a combination of things because I have multiple, illnesses, and I have different genes than other people. Like I've done the whole workup. I'm like, oh, this is why you're a mess. Okay, I get it now. And I've been exposed to chemicals in the lab that like people shouldn't
Ah,
even touch. So like
right.
I know how hard it is for the average patient, and that's given me like a lot of background and a lot of perspective for me working with patients when they're like, my goodness, I can't figure out a strain that works for me, or I
Mm.
don't know, I take edibles and nothing happens. Like I literally am like the house, like the show House where the doctor has to like figure out what's wrong with people or like fix
Yeah.
them or whatever. Like I
Yeah.
do that with cannabis because people come to me, they're like, I don't know what I'm doing and I can't figure out it. And I'm like, it's
Wow.
okay, you're not broken. Like maybe even cannabis isn't the right thing for you, or you need this plus this. And I do a little alchemy with all these plant medicines and make it work for people. But it really takes like learning genetics, pharmacology, liver status, like all these things to figure out what is the best thing. Because guess what? Like
Yeah.
plant medicine, it sounds really easy to smoke a joint and everything is okay, but it's not like that. It works for like, I
Right.
would say like 50% of patients, but other ones are like, I'm doing it wrong and I feel stupid.
I'm
So
doing it wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, cannabis isn't easy. It's definitely personalized medicine. And it's that's where I come from. So it's like I literally have to tell people it's a lot harder than just going to the dispensary, picking up, whatever flowers on sale and hoping for the best.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point because I feel like a lot of people, and admittedly, even myself, like, um, when I first moved out to California, I was just like struggling to make it as an actor. I had just left
Mhm,
Michigan and, I was balling on a budget back then. And sometimes like you don't really have um, the luxury of like choosing specifically what you think might be best for you. You're kind of just like focused on being frugal and you're like, what's like your daily deal? Like what, you know what I
mhm,
mean? Like how can I get, um like a good quantity of something but also not sacrifice quality too much and try my best to get something that will actually benefit me rather than
mhm.
just just having it you know
Yeah, and I have to say that that's the same thing I see with chronically ill patients, right?
uh-huh
So most chronically ill patients are so sick that they have reduced hours of work. They may or may not have good health care, and if they do, their insurance isn't covering cannabis anyways. And so if you get somebody who has 12 prescriptions and they're all covered by health insurance, and then they say, okay, I want to do things naturally and switch to cannabis. I'm like, well, that might cost you a bit. You might end up going through
yeah
400 or $500 of products a month. Are you prepared for that? And if you don't
right
want to do that, maybe you have to buy some flour, put it in a magical butter machine, make your own cannabis edibles and things like that. Are you willing to do that
mm-hmm.
to save some money? And so it's sometimes interesting because people do have the best intentions, but they don't realize that cannabis can get expensive if you need a lotion, drops, the
Yeah.
edibles, and the smokables and things like that. Like even myself, a lot of people think, well, you're a cannabis doctor, like you're balling as well. And you're like, well, you know what? There's a lot of work that has to go into this. Also, I'm also sick. I have
Yeah.
fibromyalgia, I have nerve
Right.
damage. I've been dealing with some other issues. And it's like to treat these things, I could be on 12 medications as well. To treat all these things takes a lot of time and a lot of work.
Right.
And I just treat that use that perspective to really understand again my patients. Like I tell them, I was like, this is the ideal situation. This is what you would do if you only had $200 a month, to purchase
mm-hmm.
things. And in reality, especially now during the pandemic, realizing a lot of people have reduced hours or lost their job completely, that's been the biggest thing. I want to buy all this, but like seriously, I got $50. What do I do?
Yeah,
And it's been
exactly.
hard. It's been hard to play, to help people with their severe problems like that. But thankfully, there are some products that are like cost effective. Like I really do like to recommend tinctures, for example, or to patients, just
Mm-hmm.
because THC or CBD are both cannabinoids dissolved in MCT oil or coconut oil, right? It's a way
Mm-hmm.
to get a lot of cannabis for, about probably like $60 in most locations. You can get a
Mm-hmm.
bottle that might last you up to 2 months, depending on how you're taking it. And so a lot of times patients think like, oh, CBD oil, I'll get that because I don't have to get a medical card if I don't live in a recreational state, or it's like easy. But what I tell patients, I'm like, CBD isn't absorbed in your body as well as THC. And so you have to use a really high dose of it sometimes to get the same efficacy that you might get from using like literally like 2 milligrams of THC and CBD together. So it's just like you
Mm,
can go through a lot of CBD bottles, or you could go get your medical card or go through the recreational system and be able to get, say, like a 1-to-1 tincture, use a couple drops at a time, like, and have your bottle last for 2 months. And that's a great way to save money.
right.
So I've been having a lot of patients do that, this year, and a lot of them are like, "Oh my goodness, instead of spending like $500 a month on CBD, like I spent $60, and it lasted me 2 months." So,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of tricks up my sleeve in trying to help patients manage their pain and anxiety on a budget.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, that's such a good point that you brought up. But I'm glad that you mentioned that that tinctures are really good too, because it's a natural medicine. It's from the earth. It's organically grown, but it is a little more complex. It is a little more involved than just picking the plant and rolling it up and smoking it. Like it is, like you said, very personalized.
Hmm.
Um, which I think is sometimes forgotten. And so I love that you brought up that point. Now, I want to ask you about this because you mentioned that you are a self-proclaimed nerd about the work, which I totally love and totally respect. And you eventually left academia after receiving your postdoctoral fellowship at Caltech and also at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Is that right?
Yeah, that's short for HHMI. That was who was funding my
HHMI.
fellowship. Yeah, and it was very,
Gotcha.
very prestigious position. So
Yeah, totally, totally.
they think I'm crazy for doing
Yeah, so that's
it.
what I wanted to ask was like what fueled your need to shift to a different path that you felt was better for you?
Yeah, so I actually did get the call to be cast on Big Brother, which is the number one like
Yes.
reality TV show in the
Season
summer.
11, right?
Yeah, so that was 11
Yeah.
years ago. And at the time it was interesting because I was actually thinking about resigning from my position, even though it was so prestigious and amazing. There was a lot of people that felt really depressed, working all the time. It was a very competitive environment, and
Mhm.
it was one that actually, I didn't enjoy at all. And I was thinking work life balance. There's got to be more to life than this, where I'm expected to like basically almost like sleep at work, like you have no
Right.
life. And it was just like, I don't know about this. I feel like I really feel called to help people, but I feel like I'm just in an underground lab, like killing animals all day. And like, I just started to like shift, and like, I just didn't feel like aligned with my work anymore, even though the goal was to save people from drug addiction. And I actually had my resignation paper, and then I got contacted by the show saying like, surprise, basically like you're cast. And so I went on the
Wow.
show for 3 months, like literally I had no notice. Like they told me I was on the show, and then they kidnapped me to be on the show,
Wow.
where I was being taped like live for like 3 months.
Yeah.
I came back, and I was actually going to go back to my job. I somehow I felt like, okay, well, it's 3 months of like, I got a vacation for 3 months. My stress levels are down. Like I can maybe deal with this really stressful job. But then I actually found that some people, including students that I had actually personally mentored and shared office space with, had actually killed themselves due to the pressures of the job. And
Mm.
I really was like, wake up call. You could be that person in 6 months. So
Mhm.
I was just shell shocked at that point, and I just realized, I was like, I don't think I want to work in a job or a culture where mental health isn't number one. Here I am studying the
Yeah.
brain and studying addiction, and a big component of drug addiction and relapse is stress. And
Mhm.
really, we should be focusing on not stigmatizing people. We should be focusing on saying, are you okay? And helping people and support them and being okay. Right? People aren't,
Yeah.
like robots. We're not, at some point we burn out and when we break,
Right.
and that, however horrible that tragedy was, really did set the tone for the rest of my life as one. The place wherever I work has to be a healthy environment. And two, if I become the boss one day, I want to foster an environment where people feel supported and healthy and happy. And two, like my goal on this earth is to make other people happy, not to make them feel horrible and like they want to die. I wasn't involved in that. I was always very supportive, but it was when I
Hmm.
left that they lacked that support. And
Hmm.
it was a really challenging time to go through, but for me, it really meant that hey, academia doesn't provide the life that I want. And I ended up going into the corporate world, designing supplements for actually celebrity brands, a whole bunch,
Mm.
very, very, very famous celebrities. And it was interesting because I also felt there like there's aspects, of marketing and everything. It was funny. It's like to be an academic and then get thrown in like the corporate marketing world was very interesting. It's a
Yeah.
very different world. And I
Yeah.
learned so much. It was like getting an MBA. I like worked for one of the biggest companies out there, and I formulated things. So I was in the natural product world. I learned a lot about how, to source products, market products, compliance, all these things that actually is so important, carried over to the cannabis and CBD industry because,
Hmm.
it's all about compliance. In the diet world, if you're making, say, diet pills for a famous company, right? And somebody gets sick, right? You can be sued, you can lose everything. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that go into play when you are in a FTC and FDA regulated like market, which,
Yeah.
in the beginning, cannabis wasn't like that. CBD wasn't like that. CBD is now, getting, under the eyes of the FDA and the FTC
Hmm.
because they've now shifted towards a path of like legalization for certain hemp products.
Mm.
But it's interesting because at first it was a wild, wild west, but I always saw that cannabis and CBD could be legal one day, would have to follow these rules, would be marketed in a more sophisticated way than they were, like goodness, 10 years ago. And I'm really, really actually grateful for the experience I had marketing these natural products and formulating them because it really just played into the whole CBD world. At first, when we
Hmm.
marketed CBD products, everything was just like, here's isolate or here's an extract and like coconut oil, that's it. And then products became so much more sophisticated. Let's add some ashwagandha in there, let's
Ooh,
add some
yeah.
mushrooms. Like, let's formulate these things and make these sexy formulas for certain purposes. And oh yeah, you can't also say that your CBD water cures cancer. Like that's not a thing. Like you can't put that
Right.
on there. Like it's just
Yeah.
so funny. It's like the things I've had to deal with for companies. So I counsel patients, but I also have advised a whole bunch of brands, worked with platforms that had many different brands on it. And it's just funny because it's still over the years, like my biggest thing is always like, goodness, you can't say that, or that's not a claim. That's a,
Right.
you put one droplet of this like adaptogen. You can't say it does the same things that this clinical research paper says because you have like a thousandth of the amount in there. So
Right.
it's been fun, but it's also been frustrating to know so much about like what you need to do to be compliant and everything. But I think it's really positioned me in a way that's made my expertise, and the way I write and everything else like that really just even more important as the years go on. And it's like, guys, guess what? If when they legalize cannabis, you're all going to be screwed because you were following the rules like from the get go. You have to be
True.
on point. And California is a little bit more ahead of
True.
the game than other states, to be honest.
Hmm.
Like there's other states I go to, I'm like, oh goodness.
Well,
When no
yeah.
one's yelled at you yet for how this is presented, I was like, oh goodness.
Yeah. So yeah, you've lived in a number of different states and different locations. How do they compare? Like how does California compare to what's going on in Nevada?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because you would think that they would be very similar markets because they're 4 hours apart, but there are different laws
Right.
out here. So, for example, you can't really grow as a patient in your own home if there's any dispensaries like anywhere near you. So, there's
Mm.
no home grows here. So, that's like a difference. So, like, even some of the things that you can sell that are targeted at home growers, like you can't do here. Every all the products have to be grown inside, through the legal dispensary system. There's no outdoor grows. Like there's different laws and regulations here. There's also different products.
Hmm.
So it's hard for me even as a patient I'm like really frustrated sometimes because I'm like, oh, I'm out of my favorite thing that I buy, and I'm like, oh, it's not available here in Nevada.
Ugh, yeah.
Ooh, do I have to go make a trip? And it's
What?
just like, or being like recommending things, if you I actually, because I talk to patients in all 50 states, it can be really difficult because I literally keep a list of, I was like, 1-to-1 tinctures aren't available in these 7
Right.
states, like
Yeah.
this. And I have to keep track because you never want to recommend something that they have no ability to get. And there's certain cannabinoids, for example, and cannabinoid extracts are available in California. They're definitely not available anywhere. Sometimes they're starting to break into like Colorado, but like for example, THC suppositories, vaginal suppositories for women, and we use those for menopause. We use those for pelvic pain, endometriosis, things like that. There's something I
Hmm.
use personally as a product. They are only
Hmm.
available in California and Colorado. So if I talk to pelvic pain patients anywhere else, I have to tell them how to make it themselves, which they're like,
Wow.
no, I don't want to do that. Even though it's really
Yeah.
simple. It's
Wow.
like RSO plus coconut oil plus an ice like cube mold, a special one. It's like not that hard, but like no one wants to make their own stuff. Everyone just wants to buy stuff. So,
Yeah.
there are product differences. Another thing, like for example, THCV, which is a really interesting cannabinoid. It like decreases appetite. It also is helpful for migraines. We're learning it has more and more uses. It might actually increase bone density or help with bone healing and things like that for
Mhm.
osteoporosis. Has definitely a couple of uses. And if I want to tell a patient, hey, try to use a strain with THCV in it, like good luck for them trying to find this, in their local thing. Or, whereas in California, I'm like, okay, get a level tablet with THCV, put it under your tongue for like, 30 seconds before
Right.
swallowing, you're all set. Like, there you go. There's your little like appetite suppressant. Um, you know, it's much harder to try to come up sometimes with like treatment plans or product suggestions for these other states just because like literally like in New Jersey where I'm from, I'll have patients tell me they're like, do they have 4 strains? I'm like, they're probably not even the strains. If we genetically tested them, it's probably not even Blue Dream. Like, who the hell knows what actually it is, right? Like, they're less sophisticated markets, or they're not allowed to have all these products. Like, it's
Yeah.
not legal to
Right.
have
Right.
edibles in half the states. And
Yeah.
so, it's much harder. And there's a lot less like consistency. Whereas a very sophisticated market like San Francisco or Los Angeles, when you send a patient to go get a vape pen, you're pretty confident that what you're telling them get and what it's labeled at is what they're using.
Right.
And so, it's been a little bit challenging. I sort of do really look forward to the day that like everything is legalized and brands can like, you know, put their product across the United States rather than just being limited to, hey, the California market's the biggest, it's it's the
Hmm.
most robust. We'll just
Hmm.
operate there and not worry. You lose money in these other states where we have to keep like setting up our own little factories in each and every state because we can't
Hmm.
cross state lines. So it's been so challenging as a clinician,
Wow.
so challenging.
That must be an incredible amount to have to keep track of with every single state having something different going on. Like, oh wow, that must be. Do you ever get confused? Like, have you ever like ended up recommending something and then had to like backtrack and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that that's not available to you in Oklahoma.
Well, I gotta say, I'm probably one of the better coaches just because it's like, if you can handle, writing 400-page books on on cannabinoid science, you probably, take care of it. But I would say, ideally, there would be an app or something that could handle a little bit more of this. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
people are working on this with like AI and things like that.
Hmm.
I do work actually, I do part of my clinician work with a company called Very Heal, and we do have like coaches all over the country that I help, train and things like that, that do work, via telehealth. But obviously, having like notes up that help. But, yeah, it would be much easier to just be like, this patient is here, like it pulls up,
Hmm.
and in the like this is actually the ideal world for a clinician is that it would be very much like your prescription where okay we're talking to somebody, okay, I have migraines and also energy issues, and you'd be able to recommend a strain, not only just recommend it but like okay I typed it in, it's like pulled it up and I can order it for them and they get it delivered. Like that would be ideal. But
That would
instead
be.
yeah, this is how it actually works. I talked to them about it, and then they're like, okay, so I got to ask the bud tender for this. And I'm like, I don't even know if your local dispensary has that, because if I go look up like a certain directory or something like a Weed Maps or something like, or Leafly or something, who knows
Sure.
if their menu online actually matches up with what they have in store. It's not always real
Mm-hmm.
time, or they
Mm-hmm.
could have sold out of it already. So it's like they go there, they're not sure what to get,
Yeah.
and then they have to ask the bud tender what's a substitute. Hopefully the bud tender is trained well, gives them the right thing. Oh, oops, they didn't. Like, it's such a mess.
There's
And
so many
so
things that could go wrong. Yeah.
it always goes wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just funny because I like almost need to be on like a walkie talkie where I'm like, okay, you're at the dispensary. Like, is it there? Like, show me the picture. Oh, no, you came home with the wrong thing. I really compare it to like, if you have a clueless husband and you're like, I need you to buy this, like, I don't know, brand of tampons, and they always come home with the wrong thing. And you're like, what? I don't understand. Like, that's with the patients. I'm like, I told you to get a sativa, like, indica, a sativa THC tincture. How did you end up with
Yeah.
like this CBD lollipop? That's not,
Yeah.
that's not what we asked for.
My girlfriend probably has many stories of me doing that exact same thing, for sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like I literally I'm like, show me the picture. Like, is that before you buy it? Show me the
Like video
picture.
call me. Yeah, I want to FaceTime me. I want to see this in person.
Yeah, and I mean the bartenders, they mean so well, but like again, when
Yeah.
you're only in some states like Nevada, I think bartenders only get paid $12 an hour here at max. Like it's like really like low. And some of them there's actually a lot of turnover and everything. So I compare it to like expecting your cashier at Target to know exactly the right product to like change your life.
Right.
And you're like,
Right.
that's not how that's gonna work. So
Right.
they try to do their best, but it is actually really complex. And like even knowing some of the things like the terpenes, that are in products, it's a lot to remember. And it's literally if they had to learn what the top three terpenes are, like in all the products and things like that. I mean, that's like asking basically for like a medical degree. Like you would need like 4 years to like memorize all this stuff.
Totally.
And that's where I do think that like the combination of technology and things like that, it's like we assist, we help people, but like yeah, I feel like maybe 5 years down the road, it's going to be a lot easier. And again, it's just like whether medical marijuana veers into like the more pharmaceutical world or not. I mean, like there's good things for it, there's bad things for it. But
Hmm.
it's right now, it is challenging. I know that cannabis helps, but it's like my suggestions to them actually getting the product is like where the gaps and holes come in. And then also too, it's like we leave so much to the patient where it's just like, okay, well, you bought these 5 strains, like here's how to figure out sort of which ones are right for you. And like it's just like there's still like I feel like so much guidance that needs to happen. Like I feel like if you're a brand new patient and you have like difficult symptoms, like most patients actually have like 3 or 4 conditions. They're like, oh, I have epilepsy, plus I'm nauseous, plus I'm like I have back pain, and you're like, that's a lot of
Oh,
things,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's a lot of things to cover. And so,
Yeah.
to be able to say, okay, I just got my card to like, not only did I get my card, but I know exactly the right products, the right dosing. I know when to take my tincture, when to smoke this, and when to take my
Yeah.
edible. Like, is a lot. And it's still like I feel like we have a lot to go in this industry, and I've been really proud to see where it's started at and where it is now,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah. It is inspiring to look back at where it began and the progress that has led to now. For me personally, it just gets me optimistic for the way things are going, and hopefully the progress that will continue, because I would love to see the day where I don't have to get updates from what's on the menu at my local dispensary through their Snapchat story.
Oh my goodness. See, I'm too old for Snapchat. I didn't even know that was a thing. Oh my goodness. That's where I should be
Yeah. Oh,
telling my
yeah.
patients to go to.
Yeah, yeah. My Snapchat story. My local dispensary has an Instagram too, and that's how I get their stories. Is how I get like I know what's on deck at that dispensary. It's so funny. Because like you said, like Weed Maps or Leafly, like that data can be not updated regularly.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's still a lot of restrictions too. For example, like if I want to make custom products for my patient, like how there's compounding pharmacies for prescription drugs. Like if you want
Sure.
to turn your migraine medicine into a topical to apply to like the back of your neck for migraine pain or something, like they can
Sure.
do that. Or if you
Hmm.
want to take food coloring out of your medicine, like in cannabis, it's not so really legal sometimes. Like if I bought some weed from the dispensary for myself and then like turned it into say vaginal suppositories for a patient and then like sold it to them, that's pretty illegal. Like, and
Yeah.
so there's a lot of restrictions where it's like you have patients that need medicine in a certain way and you can't really give it to them that way. And like it's like there's still so many hoops to go through. And again, I
Right.
really feel like there's a level of customization that patients need that they still can't access through these systems because of again it not being legally federal. And I think lawmakers, it's like we're trying to legislate medicine and it's like that's not where it should be. But again, I'm
Yeah.
very excited about where it's going, in the future. But there's still so many like there's still so much stigma around even certain things, right? So like I was telling you, my expertise in women's health, we have a lot of women that are thinking about being pregnant, are pregnant, breastfeeding, postpartum depression. Like there's all these things that are stigmatized against
Hmm.
women using cannabis at different parts in their lifetime that is still
Hmm.
so challenging to overcome and even provide harm reduction about. Like I'll have conversations with women where they don't want to tell me that they're pregnant. And I'm like, clearly I know you're pregnant. Like, let's talk about this and like figure out what the best way for you to use cannabis is. Like maybe it's not
Right.
smoking, maybe it's CBD, like let's talk about it. And still like there's so much, fear and stigma around certain things, whereas like women use cannabis like it's out of the bag. Like let's figure out how to do these things safely. And I
Yeah.
still think that that's also another field where we need so much more education around for doctors and doulas and all the clinicians that work with women, whether they're pregnant and fertile, menopausal women, like all across the lifespan. I think cannabis in women is really misunderstood.
Right. And you offer health coaching and online classes to women in regards to that. Where can people go to access that or to get into contact with you if they have questions regarding that?
Sure. So in terms of the consultations for cannabis in pregnant women, I don't do that anymore. I do offer a
Okay.
certification for clinicians that mothers can also take, but I do have a
Got it.
$50 discount for my course. It's available at drmichelleross.com/trichomes. So you'll be able to access
Hey.
that. Hey. Looking out for the listeners there. But in terms of doing consultations for everything else, I actually do refer out if you want a consultation talking about that. I do have some students of mine that actually do that. So
Oh, right on. That's awesome. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your time on Big Brother. Um, as
of course.
as a reality show enthusiast and a fellow um, on-air actor and personality myself, um, I just want to ask you. First, I want to ask you about just this. This is something I've always been curious about in terms of these like long-term reality shows that shoot for months on end. You spent 66 days at the Big Brother house with the constant strategy playing in your head, living with strangers, knowing that cameras are constantly on you. How well do you actually sleep? Because I value my sleep and I want to be I've auditioned for these shows, doctor, many times, and I'm still waiting for my day when my number is called to be on Big Brother or be on Survivor or The Amazing Race or whatever. But that's the one thing I'm concerned about because I love sleeping, doctor. How well do you sleep on these shows?
Well, I gotta say that worrying about people stealing your belongings while you sleep does not help you sleep, and that actually happened to me. I'm still missing, like, I never got back like articles of clothing and things like that. That
No
people
way.
actually try to drive you crazy on the show if you're such a threat that they can't get rid of you. Which, of course, I was. I was basically the female Dr. Will in the house, but not as charming. So trust me, he's a very charming guy.
Yeah.
But in terms of sleep, they do have competitions like have not competitions and things like that where you get punishments like being able to sleep in weird places and things like that. And
Mm.
I was punished quite a lot. So
Yeah, you didn't have an
again, because I
easy
was a
go.
threat. I did
Yeah,
not
yeah,
mean
yeah.
to go. So I didn't get quite as much sleep, and I actually have sleep apnea as well. And I talk in my sleep. I say most hilarious things ever. Like I talk about lemonade stands and God knows what else.
Whoa.
So they
Wow.
actually in my season they actually have a montage of me saying weird things in my sleep. That was a thing right before I get evicted. They're like, let's embarrass the hell out of her. So that's there. So, I don't sleep, but you know what? Also, because I shot in my sleep, I also made it so that other people couldn't sleep. So no one wanted to sleep in the same room with me. And I had like 3 or 4 people in the room. So they're like, I hate Michelle. She talks in her sleep and she talks about me in my sleep. Like I was literally like, I hate your guts. I was spilling like game secrets in my sleep. So
Oh no.
I may have slept well. No one else around me slept well. So I would
Wow.
say too, you can't have your cannabis in the Big Brother
That's
house. Now,
yep,
I
that
wasn't
was
a
my next
user
question.
back then, so
Okay.
it's sort of funny because I was still working for the government, and if you study drugs and you do drugs, you are like you're banned from ever doing that research ever
Right.
again. So
Right.
you can't even get like a DUI or something like that. So for
Right.
me, I wasn't using it at the time. I started using it like right afterwards. But if I had gone on the show now, which was actually a possibility, I was being considered for Big Brother All Stars, which happened this
Ooh.
summer. But for me, because I'm off of all of my prescriptions, I have to use cannabis every single day. I've actually tried to stop using it, and all of my symptoms, like I literally get to the point where I'm completely like muscle weakness in a wheelchair, like I cannot do it. So I have to use it in order
Ooh.
to stop the inflammation or anything I deal with. And so, if I couldn't use cannabis, I couldn't do the show. And so it's sort of interesting. It's like I need it for sleep, I need it for pain, I need it for muscles, like I need it for so many different things. And so
Mhm.
in that house, you can't have vitamins. Like I'm like, I need my
What?
5-HTP, I need my valerian root. Like there's all these things. Like you're not allowed to have like normal things. Like literally, if you're on a prescription, they dole it out to you in the diary room. Like you're not allowed to have certain things.
Whoa, no
Um,
way. I didn't know
yeah, so
that.
it's very restrictive. So, the
Hmm.
goal is to basically stress you out as much as possible because stressed out people are like abusive and fun to watch on TV. So I would say if you're looking for sleep, it's the wrong place.
Damn it. Damn
If
it. That's what I was afraid that would be your answer.
yeah, I don't think that being on reality TV is actually good for your mental health or well-being at all.
Yeah.
Unless you win, then you can spend all the money you want on massages and things like that.
And
But I think that
therapy.
yeah, I really think that there should be like a reality rehab where they send everyone like to get their like head on straight after they've been on a show
Totally.
where people are like still like laughing at them like 11 years later. I'm just kidding. No,
Totally.
it's an interesting thing being somebody who was in academia and then somebody who went to cannabis, right? I had a lot of fans, disappointed on me or angry at me that I'm not the person I was. It's just funny. It's like some people still think it's like a moral failing that I'm in cannabis. Like she's a drug dealer now, guys. I'm like, I was a drug
Uh,
scientist. I know now. I basically help sell what you consider drugs, but it's okay. I'm
right.
okay with that, but you're not. But it's interesting when you put yourself out very publicly. It can change your career, it can change how people perceive you. I still go through the cannabis industry is funny because sometimes I try not to talk about the Big Brother stuff because I feel like it does take away from my very, very, significant work I've done for the cannabis industry,
Sure.
before and after I was on the show. Other times, it doesn't matter. Like, it shouldn't have any impact. But I think that there are some people that still think that, maybe being on TV as a doctor it means that you're not a real doctor or something like that. And so that perception is my perception, the way I deal with it is that when it's useful for me to say that I was great, but like in terms of being, considered credible, when I'm trying to testify to pass laws or something like that, no one needs
Mhm.
to know that. I go there as a scientist first, but
Yeah.
sometimes it does pop
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, thank you for indulging me in that that question. It was just an itch I had to scratch. I
Oh, I know.
literally
I heard
I
since I heard doctor, not doctor, sorry, actor. I was like, uh
yeah,
oh, uh
I had
oh.
to. Yeah, oh, I had to. I had to. Cuz you know what? We've had many doctors on this show so far, but you are the first doctor like with that intersection with me. So I was like, you know what? It was an alley-oop. I couldn't not do it.
Well, it was a great chat for sure. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, right on. Well, that's so great. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is of course your personal experience with cannabis. I understand. So you mentioned that you weren't taking cannabis medically while you were on Big Brother. I understand that after you became a medical cannabis patient, or you became a medical cannabis patient rather, after you noticed that inflammation was preventing your nerves in your right hand from firing. I can imagine that would have been extremely daunting to experience. Can you tell me what happened in December of 2014?
Sure. So it was actually earlier than that. So goodness, it was 2000. It was December 2011 actually when the nerves in my
Wow.
arm stopped working. So like overnight, I woke up and I was like, okay, did I sleep on my arm wrong or something? Like what's going
Sure.
on? And like my right hand was like completely limp, and I'm like, okay, shake it off, and it like didn't come back to life like the entire day, and I
Oh
was
my
like, oh my
goodness.
god, it's not broken. Like, what is wrong with it? And also, it was like hurting too. It was really weird.
Oof.
And it turns out, months later, I found out that it was my ulnar and radial nerve that was pinched, and it was like, but pinched from like inflammation. It wasn't like a mechanical thing. It was really weird. But
Wow.
there's actually to this day, there's just inflammation that occurs there, and also actually on the other side now. So it's interesting. I was actually exposed to chemicals in the lab where I worked that do actually cause severe like nerve damage and things like that. And
Wow.
my lab director actually was like, "We lost this file and we're not sure where it went." And I was like, "Cool. Like,
What?
hopefully it didn't spill on me." Like, no joke. Like, there's a drug that causes Parkinson's people if they like touch it.
And
And so
they just lost it.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
never said
Oh
anything to her
no.
superiors because she would have been
Oh
fired,
no.
but, like, a whole bunch of people from my lab are, like, sick with cancer and nerve problems and things like
Oh
that, so it's just, like,
no.
we're all like, "Hmm, that's great." So, I was, putting my hands in formaldehyde buckets and things like that shouldn't happen, but they're like, "These are safe substances," and they're like, "They're not." Like, 5 years later, we know that they're not, they're all carcinogens,
Wow.
like, so, the
Wow.
reality is I have a genetic background where I don't deal with toxins very well. And had I known that, before I started being a scientist, I would have been like, this is not the career path for me. No,
Right.
like I literally am gonna like wilt if like I'm breathing the wrong chemicals. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
had I known that, right? It's like, we would love to go back in time. Like, yeah, I should have picked a different career or like just been a regular medical doctor or something instead because they're not putting their hands in vats of chemicals. Like, you know, like it seems so obvious now, but like I was like, oh, I'm superhuman. I'm in my 20s. Like I can do
Right. Oh
anything.
yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reality is that there are risks to dealing with things from injectable viruses, like all these things that I was touching, radiation, like all these things. Like it's
Oh my
not good for
gosh.
me, like not good for anyone, but not good for me specifically. And so,
Right.
the best thing I could have done actually was quit academia. I think somebody was looking for out for me because the longer I would have been exposed to these chemicals, I'm sure I would have be in a wheelchair right now. Probably,
Mm.
I would be
Mm.
very ill. So for me, this
Wow.
experience where, oh my goodness, what's wrong with my hand? I went to doctors. I went to the best, like seriously, the best like neurologist in Beverly Hills, like on the TV shows and things like that. And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna rewire your nerve and like take one from over here and like plug it in over here and like Frankenstein my arm, and it was gonna cost like $40,000. And it was
Oh.
just funny. I was like, there's got to be a different way. Like, what the hell? And I was like, because I have that very analytical mind, I was like, I got to figure out what's wrong with me. And then I'm going to cure myself. And it's like, and also, I need to save $40,000 because I live in LA. And then I like, that's a lot of money.
Damn
Like,
straight. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And so I was just like, okay, I have 2 months to like figure this out. And it's like I went through everything. Like I literally tried everything. And it was just funny. It was like cannabis topical, plus massage that actually helped it. And so if
Hmm.
you think about it, right? So cannabis reduces inflammation, it reduces muscle tension. There are spots, in your arm where you could put topical and it actually is getting absorbed there in the muscle. So it does reduce inflammation. That's what we give it to for patients. Like there's patients with sciatica that use cannabis topicals to reduce inflammation and actually, be able to walk without canes and things like that anymore. And so for me,
Hmm.
that worked, but also massaging it in definitely helps because the muscles and everything are really tense. But it was just funny. It was like, I ended up doing this massage where it was funny. It was, like, this is the funniest story because it's like I went to all these different doctors and things like that. Like I had acupuncturist trying to like wake up my nerves and like shocking it with like electropuncture, I think it's called. Like
Oh,
there's like
wow.
some
Yeah.
crazy things that I did. Like I was like, I feel like I'm in a Frankenstein like movie. Like what are you doing? My hand, it's like shaking and things like that. It didn't help.
Whoa.
It was hilarious, but I tried everything, and I didn't really smoke cannabis just because it made me dizzy, but I was trying like an
Mhm.
edibles, and I tried the topicals, and then finally I went to like one of those crazy like overnight like Koreatown massage places, and I would
Oh,
just went
sure.
in there for a regular like massage, and I was like, whatever, like I'm so tired and in pain. And it was just funny. The lady is like, "This is your arm is cold, like in a certain spot," and that's where I later out found that's where the inflammation and everything was going. So my blood wasn't like flowing to a certain
Whoa.
place, because it was just like all messed up. And so she massaged it literally for like 2.5 hours. Same place she goes, I fix it. And I was like,
What?
"Okay, whatever, I'll pay you more. Like this, you think you can fix this? I didn't tell her anything." And
Yeah.
she did it, and the next day my pinky started moving, and I was like, "What the heck? It's been 3 months,
Whoa.
like nothing worked." And then the other finger started working, and then I just kept like, I was like, I'm gonna keep massaging this thing and putting the weed cream on it, and like no joke, then I got full function in my hand again. And so it was amazing because again, I went back to my doctor, and he was actually angry. He was like, "No, you're still gonna have the surgery because your hand can go back to the way it was. We don't know why that happened." And I was like, "I don't need to know why that happened. Like
Right.
I'm better now. I'm not gonna have the surgery." And I mean, obviously I did need to know what was wrong with me. And unfortunately, I mean, I've literally been to all sorts of doctors over the past years. It's like, "Do you have multiple sclerosis? Do you have ALS? Do you ever like, all these things that are basically are like, your your nerves aren't working, and we can't really figure out why, but if this works for you, keep on doing it." And so, it's just like, again,
Right.
it's like because I'm not a normal patient, it's because I've been exposed to these things. Like they don't know what happened to me. So it's just
Ah, I
like,
see.
yeah, it's not fun like at all. Like I deal with a lot of nerve problems and things like that. I mean, I have to keep getting like brain checks and stuff to make sure it's like, okay, something like, going to go wrong. Am
Mm.
I going to get multiple sclerosis or something like that? That's something I actually have to keep tabs on because of what I was supposed to. But,
Wow.
for me, I always have to, remember that there is some way to treat something, right? And,
Mhm.
if I didn't explore cannabis, goodness, I might have ended up having a surgery where I would have had more, like more of my body not working. I would have never figured out that, oh, if I don't use cannabis, my other arms and legs are not going to work.
Oh
So
my
for
gosh.
me, it was really important for me to find that out, for me to fix that, and then be able to implement cannabis in my life. Because I told you again, it's like I use cannabis, I'm okay. If I stop
Mhm.
using cannabis, you can see the decline in my motor function or anything else like that. So,
Oh my
it's been
gosh.
hard, as somebody working in cannabis. It's funny because I always have to do self care and make sure that I take care of myself. I take breaks if I need to and things like that because it can be
Mhm.
really challenging to do the whole like, speak around the world thing, talk to patients all the time and be very accessible. But at the same time, like
Yeah.
cannabis helps, but it's like it's one part of my self care that I take care of myself. I am a patient first. I tell all my patients, I'm like, I'm also a patient. So,
Yeah.
I know how what you're going through. I know how challenging this is, but there is light at the end of this. And so I'm very, very grateful for what cannabis has done for my life. But, in the end, a chronic illness or, different diseases, it's still a daily struggle to make sure
Yeah.
that your disease is taken care of. So I would say, just know that cannabis, you can use cannabis to improve the quality of your life with almost any condition, but you still got to do all the other things. You still got to do your stress management. You still got to do a healthy
Mm.
diet, and you still got to go to the doctors too, because cannabis can actually reduce the amount of pain you're in. But sometimes you need to know pain, right? You need to know like, oh goodness, there's
Yeah.
something wrong with my breast, I might have breast cancer. Like you need to feel pain every once in a while. So it is
Yeah.
important
Right.
to take those breaks to know what's going on with my body, listen to your body. And
Right.
so, from my experience, I have been diagnosed with multiple things since the first thing I was diagnosed with. And so that's what I stress to patients is that listen to your body, take breaks with cannabis. It can be a short break, for 2 days or something like that. But sometimes you
Mhm.
need to feel the pain to know that your body is okay, or to know that, you might have to tweak something or get tested for something. And that's really an important part of your life.
That's deep. Yeah, that's definitely a good point that you know, our bodies feel pain for a reason. It's sending a message to us that something needs to be done about something. So yeah, it's definitely important to to feel that pain and to feel, the whole scope of the human experience. How's your health now? How are you holding up now? Are you doing okay?
Well, it was interesting. Just like anyone else during the pandemic, it was a little bit of a stressful time. I definitely don't like being isolated since I am a very
Sure,
social person, going into
sure,
conventions and seeing patients like in real life and things like that. But,
sure.
you learn how to deal with it. And I think, I even as a patient, I would say I've been leaning into cannabis a little bit more than usual. I've been upping my dose, and that's been helping with the stress and pain of things. I've been doing more yoga. Like, I hate to do yoga, to be honest. Like, I'm not that person. Like, even though I'm like tell all my patients, I'm like, oh goodness, I've got to go do an upside down dog right now. Like, but you have to. Like, your body has
Yeah.
to move. If you're not going to the gym, you've got to do it. And so, coming up with creative ways to still, be in movement. For me, actually, I went on the ketogenic diet. As I realized I had gained, I don't know, like the pandemic, I don't know, 50 or something. I was like, what is going on here? I'm stress eating. And so, it's one of those things where you have to like, shift and correct. And so it's been interesting. I mean, I told you healthy diet plus doubling down on say like extra stress management has really gotten me through this period. And it's something that again, being a patient and gives me that perspective to say, hey, you know what, like do the things that you might not want to do, but it's going to really yield, I think, significant benefits for you during these stressful times.
Absolutely, absolutely. And from one reluctant yogi to another.
Smoking weed makes yoga better.
It
That's all
does.
I've got
Oh,
to
it
say.
totally does. Yes.
You feel less
Yes.
self-conscious about like falling over doing silly poses. So
You really do. You really, really do. Yes. Shout out. Shout out to that. Yes. I love that. Yeah. From one reluctant yogi to another, doctor, I really appreciate you coming on the show today and offering your perspective. Before we go, let's just remind our listeners one more time where they can go to find out more about what what you're up to and to keep up with the work that you're doing.
Sure. So you can visit my website at drmichelleross.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Dr. Michele Ross, and shoot me a DM if you have any questions or want to learn more about my work.
Yeah, and we have that special trichomes link as well, right? What was that one again?
Sure, it's drmichelleross.com/trichomes, and that will give you a $50 discount off my cannabis and motherhood certification course. So you can learn all about how to use cannabis from everything from trying to get pregnant to pregnancy, breastfeeding, postpartum depression, and parenting and beyond.
I love it. Well, doctor, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. You are generous with your time, and I hope you continue to stay safe and stay well in Vegas. And hopefully we'll meet up at a convention sometime, whether that be an in-person convention or some sort of crazy virtual reality thing that they're doing nowadays or whatever.
I'm sure we will meet. Thank you so much. It was fun.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. My thanks again to Dr. Michele Ross for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@trichomes.com. You can help others find the show by taking a moment to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. You can also join in on the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by trichomes.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening, y'all.